What's up, everyone? It's Dakota, and welcome back to another Magic the Gathering video, and we are doing things a little bit differently for this ban and restricted announcement. So, typically, I have two separate videos. I have one where I have, like, my predictions, go over my thoughts and opinions, and then another one where we actually read the article, we go over the decisions for either no changes or the changes that were made. This one, I'm just going to combine the two together to make just a slightly longer video and just kind of put all the information in one place rather than, scattering it over, like, two videos and stuff. But of course, before we get too deep into the predictions, before we get into like the articles, things like that, if you're not already subscribed to the channel and you want to see more videos from me where I do a lot of stuff based on the Modern and Pioneer format, even some other longer form videos, doing some like fun things and stuff on the channel. So if any of that interests you, please consider subscribing, ring the notification bell. This is both free and easy ways to support me and my content, and I do greatly appreciate it as we are trying to get to 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year. With all that said, let's go ahead, let's get into the video. So, the BNR, there is some interesting talks, at least in Pioneer and Modern, and of course that's kind of like where a lot of our focus is going to be on. But we'll start with Standard, where for me, personally, with the little bit I've got to play in Standard, my wife plays a lot of Standard, what she's gotten to experience, and what I've, talking to other people that play Standard and just kind of like the general discourse and stuff like that, I think Standard's actually in a pretty good place. And with rotation coming up, I don't know if you benefit from unbanning like maybe like the handful at most cards that are currently banned in Standard. And I don't know if there's necessarily any cards that are so oppressive that they need to be banned right now that they couldn't just wait until rotation happens to kind of see what happens to them. So I think Standard overall is in a very good place, and I think Standard's actually probably the best it's been in a while. So, take it with a grain of salt. I don't play a lot of Standard. But again, like with my experiences and, what I've heard from other people, Standard's really good right now. So I don't think there's any reason to change it until, rotation actually happens when I believe Bloomburrow is released. Moving on to Pioneer. This is where we get a little lengthy on it, and everyone knows that I can talk forever. But Pioneer, so as far as like bannings, cards that I would absolutely want to see go: Treasure Cruise and Fable the Mirror Breaker. And we'll get to here in a second. The other card that I would not be surprised if it actually got hit on the list, it would just make me very upset, would be Amalia. So Treasure Cruise, we'll start there. Treasure Cruise, I mean, we know that's like the best card in Izzet Phoenix. Izzet Phoenix is probably at least the most played deck. We can argue if it's better than, Rakdos Vampires, if it's better than Amalia combos, if it's better than Nibdelite, what have you. Things like that. But, if it's the most played deck, then, we're going to use Occam's Razor. Like, if it is the most played deck, it is probably the best deck. So, Treasure Cruise does this thing, where you put a bunch of cards in your graveyard, you just play the game of Magic, and you can essentially pay 1 blue to draw 3 cards. It is a one-sided Ancestral Recall, and it just makes the deck more resilient to mass removal and even like target removal too, where maybe typically 2 or 3 times max is where you would be at like without Treasure Cruise to actually be able to have enough spells to then get your Phoenixes back. Treasure Cruise just kind of like increases that consistency. Even if it's like 2 spells in a land, chances are if you already have another spell in hand, you're going to be able to do it again. If you have drawn another Treasure Cruise, then conceivably you could then put enough cards in your graveyard again to where you can, go and get back again multiple Phoenixes and then just draw another 3 cards, and they can either help you do it again if you need to, or they can just help you close out the game by getting rid of some blockers, or again having more cantrips to then find removal to get rid of anything that kind of gets in your way to be able to close out the game. It's kind of sickening, and quite frankly I think it's maybe the best card in the deck that isn't named, Phoenix or Ledger Shredder. It just ends up doing a lot for the very simple lines of like draw 3 cards. So I personally would want to see it gone from the format and just kind of like ruin a little bit. I mean, the deck's still going to have its consistency. It's just not going to be able to consistently then bring back, multiple Phoenixes a turn, in game ones where people typically aren't playing any graveyard hate to kind of like stop your opponent from getting like treasure cruise and things like that. Secondly, Fable the Mirrorbreaker. We know that at least for a long time, Rakdos midrange, a lot of the reason to play red is to play Fable the Mirrorbreaker. It does so much, and if the flip side of Fable goes completely unchecked, the game is like over. You just get to double up on like your best non-legendary creature, or we would see like Archfiend of the Dross. Yeah, it's like Archfiend of the Dross. We would see people like play that. If you get like a second flip Fable, then you're able to make a ton of Fables on your opponent's end step, and then untap and then copy a bunch of like whatever other creature you have. Being able to copy Vein Ripper, being able to copy Blood Tithe Harvester, being able to copy, really just name a creature that's played in either the traditional Rakdos midrange or played in Rakdos Vampires. And it's going to be a really good card to be able to copy and have multiple copies of. And Fable allows you to do that, and it also allows you to kind of like ramp in a way. It gives you treasure tokens when you attack, and we know that for other like unfair decks, like Creativity, where this technically can give you 2 targets where you can then Creativity for 2. A little bit more relevant in Modern doing that than it is in Pioneer, because a lot of those decks are either getting like Gearhulk back or they're getting like Atraxas. But nonetheless, Fable just offers you so much value for so little mana. 3 mana to make a 2/2, whatever, but then just getting to kind of like filter the bad cards out of your hand and draw. The worst feeling of someone that is playing Fable, like when you're sitting on the other side of it, is your opponent puts their Fable trigger on the stack and then just decides that they're not going to discard any cards because their hand is already amazing. On top of, again, like they've gotten this 2/2 that they're continuing to generate mana from, and increase the likelihood that they're going to be able to double or like triple spell on like turns before you're able to double spell, and it's just a mess. Fable is such a good Magic card, and honestly, like it probably needs to leave Pioneer, maybe for the sake of like other mid-range decks to maybe have like more like green, black, white, or even like black, white, or something like that. But I think as long as Fable is legal, it's probably a mistake playing a mid-range deck that is not able to play Fable the Mirrorbreaker in it. Finally, we have Amalia, and this one I'm biased towards because Amalia is the deck that I really enjoy playing. I think it has like a really solid matchup against the metagame at large, and the fact that it can win the game, on turn 3, like actual factual, just win the game on turn 3, or just be able to combo out of nowhere and either put your opponent on like having an answer immediately right in that moment, but if they tap out, they essentially die, because then you could just chord for whatever piece you're missing and start the loop from there to end up being able to win the game on the spot. And even though for me this is my favorite deck to play, I love playing this deck in Pioneer, I can also understand how that creates an unfun experience. It's just like not so like when Rakdos midrange goes Sorin, Vein Ripper. I mean, technically there is some play there where for a lot of decks it's like, okay, well, I need to have a creature in play and then I need a removal spell, but like I could conceivably get rid of Vein Ripper. And you could do the same thing with Amalia. Like you leave up removal spells, you can kill Amalia. But the difference is that when you tap out against Rakdos Vampires and they do their thing, like you get an untap and be able to do it. You tap out on your turn to play like a creature or whatever. If you're Rakdos Vampires and you play, Sorin minus play Vein Ripper, go, and all of a sudden the Amalia player chords for 2, they get a Wild Growth Walker, they untap, and then they play, a way to gain life or explore, what have you, and then boom, you're dead. The game is over. Like, I've gained a ton of life, and even if, the Vein Ripper triggers would put you above, 20 whatever life, there's still the threat of either a Return to the Ranks or an Aetherflux Reservoir that is going to then end the game at that point, unless you can somehow mill a card from them or magically play counterspells in your red-black deck. So, again, while it would definitely hurt my feelings, I can understand. I can be convinced that Amalia is probably a fine card to just not exist in the format, or at least something from that deck getting hit and making the deck maybe a little less consistent, or just kind of like taking away the combo altogether, and you have to just naturally be able to gain the life to be able to get up to 20 and blow up the board. So that's my thoughts on Pioneer. As far as getting anything unbanned, I literally made a video about a bunch of cards that could not get unbanned, and I don't think there's any other cards on there that being unbanned will add anything positive to the format, or just do any good. They won't do any good. So I think I'm good with kind of like how the ban list is right now. And, we could probably add a few cards to it this time around, but I don't think there's anything that we can take away from it either. Modern, I think it's probably too early for bannings, and I think the main thing is the fact that Modern Horizons 3 has just come out. Even though, Storm, Nadu, Storm, turn 2 kills, Nadu, you can just win the game as soon as you play the bird, and then you can just play this random uncommon now from, Kamigawa block, the original Kamigawa block, and you just get to trigger it a billion times and, win with Thassa's Oracle, kind of like we're playing CEDH or something like that. But overall, other decks are having success in the format. I think there was like a challenge that, me and my co-host Randy on the Casual Spikes podcast looked at like a Jeskai Control like final, and Jeskai Control is picking up a lot of heat on it, where it's just playing very well. We see a lot of Eldrazi decks kind of running around as well. So I think there is some unfair decks. I think even with the little bit of time that we've had to adjust to the metagame, Nadu and Storm aren't just like taking all the top 8 slots or most of the top 8 slots and then winning or getting second, what have you, in every single challenge or whatever. I don't even think really in most challenges either. Like, I'm sure they're putting copies in the top 8 and like other challenges, but necessarily winning them as well is something completely different. So I think we need to give the format a little bit of time to adjust to it. Maybe Nadu and Storm figure out a way to then become so consistent or whatever that other decks just aren't able to keep up with it. But it has yet to be seen because we just haven't had enough time with like the cards and whatnot. It could also just be that those decks are like very good, but you need to be a very good pilot to be able to play them. And they'll be kind of safe, like how Titan's safe with it's like skill gap among players. Maybe those decks will kind of find their way into that realm as well. Grief is always a card that I would be happy to see go. I think the play patterns where you evoke it and then you either blink it with like Ephemerate, or you get it back with Not Dead After All, or any of the other like undying type effects, it's just not fun. Getting double Thoughtseize, no matter how powerful the format is not fun. And then on top of that too, the fact that now like you're playing mono black scam essentially, and you just get access to Necro Dominance, and Necro Dominance is such a powerful card that even though it's like a nerf Necro is still very good. So, and I don't want to see Necro Dominance necessarily go, but I would definitely like to see Grief kind of go. I think it's spent enough time in the format. I'm done with the scam starts and everything. Just get rid of it and be done with it. Rip the Band-Aid off. And that extends to Legacy as well. Reanimator is like one of the most popular decks, and I remember playing like Reanimator, and it's just like I either get to play a scam hand or I get to play Atraxa on turn 1, and sometimes I'm just both, where I get to free Thoughtseize my opponent, take their Force of Will, and then I get to Dark Ritual and bring back my Grief with like a Reanimate, and then get to take the other counter spell from their hand and then like Entomb Reanimate an Atraxa, and it's just game over. 10 power in play, drawing a bunch more cards, pass the turn, and everything's just, fine and dandy. Even the games where you're able to just, like, play, evoke a Grief and then reanimate it, whatever, essentially, like, the scam starts and stuff. Still good in Legacy, as good as it is in Modern. Probably just doesn't need to exist anymore. So, those are my thoughts, predictions, bannings, unbannings. Modern, I guess I did kind of skip over the unbannings because I don't think there's going to be anything unbanned. At this point, Splinter Twin probably would have been unbanned by now. there's probably some other stuff that can come off the list, like maybe the artifact lands couldn't come off. I mean, Affinity I thought was going to end up being like pretty good in the format, and so far hasn't really put up too many results. So, you know, I guess throw it a bone. You could play like the monocolored like artifact land cycle. Probably those ones would be, I would say, the safest, where like you know that this deck is going to get them, or some other style of deck is going to get them, and you just kind of be like, whatever. I mean, even Karn, the Great Creator, is seeing a little bit more play in the format, so you know they probably wouldn't even be really like that good. But yeah, so those are my thoughts, opinions, etc. on, you know, potential bannings and unbannings in all, you know, Standard, Pioneer, Modern, and Legacy. So that's going to do it for this part of the video, all the explanation and everything. And hopefully we get some pretty good answers and some, you know, maybe some good news from the announcement. So let's go ahead and take a look at the announcement. So here we are with the official announcement. As we can see, there are no changes in all formats, and then we will get another announcement sometime in August. So initial thoughts, I think this kind of lines up with what I was talking about earlier, where Standard really probably doesn't need any changes so close to rotation, and it is a bigger rotation than normal since Standard is now including the most sets that it has ever had at one time, and again, rotation coming with Bloom Burrow. So the cards that they talk about later down in the article, you know, could potentially see less or more play depending on what actually happens, and there's a lot of good sets rotating from Standard, so probably just fine to leave it as is until then. Pioneer, while the metagame I think is very much in favor of something like Izzet Phoenix and Black-Red midrange, I think overall that they're like the results of while the top 2 decks are putting up like multiple decks in the top 8, I think that there's actually a pretty wide metagame that, you know, while the top 2 decks aren't necessarily taking them down, like other decks can and are winning, you know, the bigger events. And I think like the top 2 decks are just probably the most consistent from a game to game and a match to match basis. Modern, we just got Modern Horizons 3. Like other than like a few decks that feel like they're super powerful and that they're doing something generally more powerful than everything else that's going on, we've actually seen other decks doing well and even like winning, you know, the challenges and things like that. So really probably didn't need that many changes, and like Legacy, I guess it's just going to continue to be a dumpster fire, but we'll go ahead and we'll read kind of like some of the explanations and stuff. So tabletop details provided by Andrew Brown, which is this person here. I believe that they were a pro player way back when. I like recognize the name. I think it was like a pretty good player as well. So Standard, it's been 1 year since we changed Standard's rotation time from 2 years to 3. We've been monitoring the format closely, and the change was a first step to our renewed goal to revitalize tabletop Standard. The changes produced many of the desired results. We're seeing more diversity in strategy across the Standard metagame, and more players are playing the format at their local game stores. In the last year's article, we outlined that the time before the release of the summer set, the Bloom Burrow set, would be when we looked at making changes to the Standard format. We talked about how banning events are an easy exit point from the format. Our goal is to have a more consistent and stable management of the format. Today we're choosing not to ban any cards leading up to this year's rotation. The format looks very healthy as a whole, and many of the cards that we were worried about post-rotation lose considerable strength. We considered banning a few cards, with Atraxa and Knight Errant Eos being our leading candidates. It is difficult to predict what exactly will happen after each rotation. We may see these cards break out into other decks or strategies, but we're happy as long as the metagame continues to evolve. Atraxa has been a consistent presence in the metagame as a headliner card in domain ramp strategies, and sometimes can be too much to overcome after it's resolved. With rotation, these strategies lose tri-lands from the Streets New Capenna and have a difficult time getting domain, which will rein in the deck's overall power level. Boros Convoke has always been a solid choice in the metagame, showing up in MTG Arena in high frequency, and we are happy with the existence of tokens aggro decks, but sometimes the opening draw can be too difficult to beat in the early game. With rotation, it loses Voldaren Epicure, which is a critical card in the deck's ability to play Knight Errant of Eos on the second turn after casting a Gleeful Demolition. So I agree with, you know, everything that's written here. Atraxa is a very powerful card. I don't know if there's very many, like, I could imagine, like, Boros Convoke with a, like, kind of a middling draw, you know, if they're
able to kind of just be kept off a lot of creatures, and they invest a lot of resources and get blown out by like Sunfalls and things like that. I could see like an Atraxa being able to take over the game, what have you. That said, like Boros Convoke is, in all formats is a very powerful deck that when it just has its absolute best draw, in Pioneer it's putting like 14 power into play or something crazy like that on turn 2. And in Standard it's putting considerably less power into play, but, with all the cards essentially that the Pioneer version has picked up that have come out in Standard, the deck is probably just like super consistent and overall probably mostly made of cards that are played in like the Pioneer version. So probably safe to assume that, with both decks losing a lot of consistency that both Atraxa and Knight Errant of Eos play in them, that it's probably okay to not make any changes until August, where after we get Bloom Burrow, and just see how the metagame kind of evolves from there. Moving on to Pioneer, we are seeing a flood of results in deck lists stream in from Pioneer Regional Championship qualifiers, and it's a mixed bag. The biggest positive we are seeing in the format is that almost every macro archetype is viable in the format. So that's saying that aggro, control, combo, mid-range, things like that are viable in the format. At least one or two different versions of those decks. One thing that we're going to keep a close eye on is the evolution of the Amalia combo deck as a creature combo deck. We are generally positive on it. Unfortunately, its ability to draw the game is a negative play experience, and that can happen just by itself, where you can sacrifice your Selfless Savior or what have you, something to that effect, and give your Wildgrowth Walker indestructible. Of course, your opponent's playing like red-white or anything like that can also make your creature indestructible or make Amalia's power go above 20 before her triggered ability resolves, meaning that it just happens indefinitely. And of course, on Moto, that ends up being a little bit worse because then you have to mill your entire deck. Your opponent gets to see essentially your whole deck and before you can officially like draw the game and things like that. So we are making no changes to the format today. We will still see if there's room in the metagame to shift around the surge of Amalia combo. And because regional championship qualifiers for Pioneer continue mid-July, we don't like to disrupt those events mid-season. The regional championship round for Pioneer starts September 28th and goes to December 7th. So that's kind of also what was talked about and to be expected, that we wouldn't get any changes to the Pioneer format mid-season unless it's something like super drastic and polarized. I think we have to be like near tier 0 format probably for changes to be made mid-season. But overall, again, like while there's cards that I would have liked to see go, it's kind of a little disheartening that there's not even like a look at something like a Treasure Cruise or even Fable the Mirror Breaker, and it's Amalia, and more so the fact that it has the potential to draw games and kind of create some very confusing scenarios, rather than some other powerful strategies that are seeing a lot of play and aren't even really being like looked at as like potential like threats to the metagame, because they are the threat to the metagame. But overall, like no changes to the Pioneer. Like I'm okay with that. Just a little unfortunate that Amalia is kind of like getting the keeping the eye on that deck. So Modern, as we had announced previously, there'll be no changes to Modern in anticipation of Pro Tour Modern Horizons 3. So far, Modern Horizons 3 is having a sizable impact on the format, and we expect to see it reflected in the upcoming Pro Tour. We are still very early into this new metagame, although Nadu Winged Wisdom has raised some early concerns. It appears the Modern format has proven it has the tools to fight it. As a result, over Modern leagues and challenges starting to stabilize over the last few days as the format continues to adapt. With the rise of spell-based combo and Ruby Storm with Ruby Medallion and Realm Monsoon Mage, from Modern Horizons 3, it is a notable addition to the format that fights Nadu by being typically a full turn faster. Similarly, as risen in popularity, so too have its efforts to defeat it. It has been awesome to see archetypes emerge. The new decks utilize both energy and Eldrazi packages, as well as the aforementioned combo decks with tons of new build rounds. Eldrazi Tron, Mardu midrange with Ajani, Nikado Pride, and Sorin House of Morkov, Mono Black, Necro Dominance, Gruul Prowess, Esper, Goryo's Vengeance, Isn't Murktide as Erase Control, Man Nadu, and Boros Burner, all decks that have won Magic Online challenges since the release of Modern Horizons 3. And, essentially me kind of sharing like kind of the same reasoning probably for no changes. I mean, aside from, wanting to see what the Modern Horizons 3, Pro Tour metagame would look like without any bannings or whatnot. There are some cards that are proven to be very problematic, Nadu and the Ruby Storm decks being able to win the game pretty easily, with Nadu getting to just have an instant win that turn, but then also having different ways where it can kind of just keep looping through its deck, make a ton of 1/1s, and force your opponent to essentially like have a Wrath, but then they still kind of lose to the dumb like Thassa's Oracle or whatever. So really, Modern having no changes, seeing what the metagame is going to look like when we get to Pro Tour MH3 is totally fine with me. And of course, those two decks are not absolutely dominating the format in terms of, winning the events. We have all the aforementioned decks actually winning and taking down challenges too. So I only expect the metagame to kind of get better and do a better job of adapting to the format and just trying overall to kind of combat, Nadu and Ruby Storm. While also, probably with all the hate going towards them, there's other decks that are able to, rise to the top of the metagame or near top of the metagame. So that's Modern. The last one we'll look at is Legacy. We are approaching Legacy similarly to Modern right now. Modern Horizons 3 has brought major changes to the format, and we are waiting to see how it responds to its release. While the community explores Modern Horizons 3, we'll continue to monitor the play rate and win rate of Reanimator. As it surged dramatically in recent months, we intend to take a hard look at Legacy in our next announcement coming in late August. So, again, kind of weird to approach it the same way. I know that we had gotten some some commander decks in the Modern Horizons 3, and I believe that there's some cards that are in there that are seeing like Legacy play. Of course, there's also some powerful cards in the Modern Horizons 3 set. I believe Nadu is also seeing some play. I've seen some lists playing Nadu in Legacy. So, I mean, overall, I guess could be a mistake with Reanimator being like a quarter of the metagame according to Goldfish, or like near a quarter of the metagame, which is a lot. That was like prime scam in Modern, full powered scam in Modern. So maybe the right call to like try to allow it to adjust to the metagame, but the namesake set for the Pro Tour makes sense to not make any changes. Legacy, I would say once you get past up to 25% or really close to 25%, you're better off just saying whatever. Like let's make some changes now, even if they are drastic, because you could just go back in August and unban if you think it would be okay to kind of bring it back. I will leave the article in the description if you care about Historic, Brawl, Timeless, what have you. But that's basically the formats that we care about here on the channel. And overall, again, probably I'm pretty happy, I think, with no changes overall, just kind of as we explore like the Pioneer and Modern metagame, and of course potentially exploring Standard once we get to rotation and we get the release of Bloom Burrow. So I don't know. I can't really be mad. Modern does seem like it's in a pretty diverse place overall. And while there are some decks that, are insanity, the fact that Ruby Storm can win on like turn 2, imagine being on the draw and you just like play a tap land or something like that. You play a fetch land with the idea that I'm going to go fetch a Triome, and your opponent just goes Ritual into Ral, into Ritual, into another Ritual, into, a bunch of other stuff to just like basically flop their hand on the table and like grape shot you for 20 on turn 2. Not necessarily a fun experience to have, but at the end of the day, it is what it is. If it's not winning every single event, what have you, and there's plenty of other decks that are actually taking down tournaments over like Nadu and Storm, then maybe they're just bordering on like okay. Maybe you could like knock them down a peg to make them a little less consistent, what have you. But we'll have to see that in the August announcement that will come at some point during that month. But yeah, that's going to do it for me in this video. Hope y'all enjoyed. If you did, please leave a like on the video. Comment down below if there should have been any changes to any of the formats that you play and what you would want to see banned and why. Of course, subscribe and ring the notification bell so you know when videos get posted to support me and my content. Again, we're trying to get to 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year. really going to push hard in the last half of 2024 to kind of achieve that goal. But yeah, that's going to do it for me. Hope you all enjoyed the video, and I'll see you all in the next one.